Good afternoon and welcome. Welcome to our live stream Q&A of The Mill. My name is Anna Blanco and I'm the Executive Director of the International Ocean Film Festival. And it's my pleasure and my honor to welcome you today to our distinguished panel and a very interesting conversation about the film The Mill. Before we get started and I introduce our host for today, I just wanted to say a few things about the film festival for anyone who's joining us that's new to the International Ocean Film Festival. This is our 17th year celebrating films that are inspired about the ocean. As many of you know, we were supposed to go have an in-person festival in March of 2020, and due to the pandemic, we had to postpone. And now we are hosting the films virtually, which has its pluses in the sense that we're able to reach out to a lot of people around the world. We're getting a really good response on all the films and all the Q&As. So thank you to everyone out there who's joining us. I would like to say that there are 54 films online. There are 14 Q&As, and all of the Q&As are being recorded and they'll be available after they've been hosted. So this one will be available immediately afterwards. We also have our Global Audience Choice Award. So all of the films that are on our website and up for viewing are available and eligible to be recognized as our Global Audience Choice Award. So please vote. And if you haven't seen this particular film, The Mill, I highly encourage you to do it, to watch it. It's an amazing film, and I think you're going to be very entertained with what you see today with our panelists. A quick shout out to all the sponsors of the International Ocean Film Festival who have continued to support us during this pandemic and have definitely made it possible for us to be here today. And another big shout out to all the volunteers. The IOFF is a volunteer-driven organization, and we rely heavily on the volunteers who make it happen. We have a lot of them who are signed in today, so thank you for joining us, and thank you for all your dedicated passion and commitment to making the festival possible. Today's format will be a Q&A of about 40 to 45 minutes. We'll be taking your questions that you send in, and we'll spend the last 15 minutes or so answering your questions. So please send them in and let us know where you are writing to us from. We like to know where people are in the world when we're communicating with them and sharing their questions. So really appreciate that. So it's my honor to introduce David McGuire, our host for today. David is a friend. David has been involved with the Ocean Film Festival for the last 13 years. He's the founder and director of Stewards, an organization that is a part of Earth Island Institute. He's also served on many local committees on MPAs and other policy organization. He's very active in everything he does to protect our oceans and specifically to protect our sharks. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to David, and thank you, David, for being here today. You're muted.
Sorry, I had some background noise, so I muted myself. Thank you, Anna. It's great to host another one of these intriguing, interesting, and fascinating discussions with the International Ocean Film Festival. And the festival is truly international, and we have been supported by the Canadian Consulate. We have a wonderful relationship with Canada. We love Canada, despite our president, and hopefully the Canadians will love us back. We share a lot, and we're going to share a lot today with a fascinating subject on the mill. And it's about people, it's about water, it's about the environment, and it's about the interface between the two, and a little bit of politics, actually a lot of politics and greed involved. So we have the filmmaker, David Craig, who's the director and produced this documentary, I believe it was last year. It's made the festival circuit, won some awards. I just watched it again last night, and it has so many layers that you really need to kind of look at it to appreciate some of the sub-stories and context of the film. And we also have the the author of the book, and Joan, I think Joan Baxter, and I think the book was started, you published it in 2016 or 2017. But I think the by story is the mill, the 50 years of pulp and protest. And both the film and the book are based on this environmental and sociological battle around a pulp mill and wood mill in Nova Scotia. So welcome, Joan and David, the International
Thank you.
Live. Thank you. And it's exciting that this is our second week, so it's too bad we can't meet in person. We do these great conversations every year, but like everybody else, here we are on Zoom. But the great thing is it connects us to people across the globe that may not have been able to come and attend our festival at Fort Mason. It's a 4-day festival with a lot of breakout sessions and conversations like these live. But it's great to share these with our audience and also try to encourage the subject matter as well as the films themselves and have people globally watch them, hopefully year round. So I did ask a question, Joan, and then I jumped in and completely cut you off. So I apologize. But can you tell us about the basis of the story? What inspired you? Obviously, it's a very compelling, and I imagine you live close by, and that it's something that's affected you personally. And it clearly affects you personally now, I'm sure, and through the publication and the readings of this book.
Inspiration would have been because of the smell. It's a craft bleached pulp mill, which is the most polluting kind of pulp mill. They make a bleached pulp that goes into all sorts of things that we use, a lot of tissues and so on. And that mill was opened in 1967 when I was a child. And I hadn't thought much about it. I had lived abroad for years. And one morning in 2016, I woke up. I live 40 kilometers away as the crow flies. Walked out my door and just about fell over because of the smell of the mill. And I thought, this can't be right. It was like acid in the air and it gave me an instant headache. In fact, I even got a nosebleed. I tried to go for a run. I came home and I called the number that was available for the environmental manager. And he told me there was nothing wrong. It was just the direction of the wind that day. And I said to him, well, that's not good because that means if I'm not getting it, somebody else is. And he kind of said, yes, that's right. And I made a phone call a few minutes later to a group that I had seen online called Clean the Mill, a very well-known actually folk singer from Pictou County, Nova Scotia, Dave Gunning. He's well known down in your country as well. And he had been working with that group for ages. And I thought I'd just call him up and maybe write an article. I'm a journalist and sometime author. And when I got off the phone 2 hours later, I had 27 pages of notes. And I said, this looks like a book. And that's how it started. I had no idea it was going to be timed just when the mill was having this huge battle to keep its existence going. I wasn't even aware of that when I started it. So that's sort of the genesis of the book.
Well, I'll have to read it. I'm sorry, I wasn't aware I would be hosting. I volunteered to host this, but I have seen the film and I've done a little bit of homework. And this struggle is ongoing. 50 years is the subtitle of your book, and of struggle. What was it? 50 years of pulp and protest.
Yeah.
So there's obviously been a lot of activism in the community. A lot of impact on the health of the community, as well as the impacts on Boat Harbor, where this effluent, this pipe is, and the controversy of moving this pipe to another bay. And what really impressed me, David, is what I loved about the film is that the Pictou Landing First Nations, and that the female chief, who was very passionate in bringing the kids in, and that whole context of the land that Native Americans have, and First Nations and the stewardship of the land, and yet they're getting the short end of the stick, as many First Nations have here in North America, meaning the lower North America as well as the upper North America. They haven't served those First Peoples very well. But I thought that was really a compelling story in the activism, but also what it almost seemed to unify people that might have had previous frictions, like for example, fishermen and First Nations for fishing rights, or the lumbermen and fishermen. So maybe you can speak to that, and maybe tell us a little bit about the chief, because I was really impressed by her.
Well, yeah, she's a very impressive individual, and she had just been elected chief and Pictou Landing First Nation. And what happened was there's a pipe from the mill that goes under. There are 3 rivers entering Pictou Harbor. So it goes under the East River and through an underground pipe, and then exits on the ground, and then is directed into Boat Harbor. Boat Harbor was a tidal lagoon adjacent to the community of Pictou Landing, and in 1967, that particular part of the reserve was appropriated by the government of Canada, government of Nova Scotia, and with the intent of making it a effluent basin for the mill. So the real tragedy of the mill begins in 1967 with the appropriation of what was once what they called the ASEC, or it was called like the back room. What it meant was like the pantry. It was where they would go to fish, hunt, children would play in the waters, but there was enormous amount of pressure exerted on that community, and what had happened is, once it was opened as an effluent treatment center facility, I should say, it completely destroyed that body of water. And the emotional impact on the community was profound. They were told that there would be no impact, or not a significant impact, and that turned out to be a colossal lie. And I think everybody was completely shocked in that community was completely shocked by the impact, the immediate impact. And so from that point onwards, there has always been friction between the First Nation and the mill in terms of trying to moderate the pollution, trying to get that facility closed. And there have been decades of negotiation, promises broken. But in 2014, and just after Chief Paul was elected, there was a spill at the entry point on towards the Boat Harbor side of things. And it spilled 40 million liters, which was basically a day's production, on sacred ground. And as a result, the community, the First Nations community, set up a blockade. And that meant the mill had to close. And there was enormous amount of tension. There was enormous amount of pressure exerted by the mill and also the government. But I think what was the surprise for the Pictou Landing First Nation was that there was a lot of support from the non-Indigenous community. That blockade attracted a lot of people who honked their horns in support. And I think with that point, they realized that there was a possibility of a coalition. And so Chief Paul was very involved in the negotiations between the province, the mill, and the Pictou Landing First Nation. And she extracted a promise from the province of Nova Scotia that Boat Harbor finally would be closed. And that led to the passage of the Boat Harbor Act, which in January 31st, 2020, closed the mill, or closed the Boat Harbor treatment facility, and in effect closed the mill. So she's been a very effective leader. She's been a leader that has reached out to the greater community. She's very personable. She's very astute, but has a sort of a natural charisma that has really facilitated a lot of support in the community.
Well, it's definitely a very compelling story that, as in our conversation earlier, we were talking about it. It it's repeated all over the world. And
Yeah.
we have it here in the US. And actually, I'm a filmmaker as well. And the first documentary I ever worked on was called Ancient Redwoods and the Bottom Line. And it was about redwood extraction. And it was a can't remember the paper company, but it was a family-owned business, and there was manageable harvesting. And then a large company bought it, and then they just raided it. And it was actually literally corporate raiders, Drexel, Burnham, Lambert, and
Right.
we interviewed Julia Butterfly Hill, but it tore the community apart because it's jobs versus resources versus health of the community and the environment. And it's I think you really tell the story. Like some of the shots of those treatment ponds, it looks like these red flowers from overhead where it's this water. And one of the things I was involved with early on is very relevant, it was with Surfrider Foundation, and it actually founded this group of surfers, which is now an international organization that works for clean water, access to the waves. I'm a surfer, but it was all around a pulp mill in Eureka, and the surfers sued, I think it was Scott Paper also. They make toilet paper and pulp mill, and there are tons of dioxins in these bleaching processes.
Yeah.
And they're carcinogens, and they're in the water. Go ahead. Sorry. Go again.
Sorry, you're cutting out on me. I was just going to say that this mill was the Scott Paper Mill when it was opened in '67.
Yeah, I saw that. So you have these large corporations that get these federal subsidies, right? Maybe you can speak to that, Joan, a little bit, because I was just doing a little bit of research, and apparently it's probably in court right now because this is an ongoing battle. It's closed, but again, going back to the divisiveness in the community, I mean, this mill supported a lot of industry that you don't see, right? The people who are cutting the trees, people who are growing the trees, the guys who are in the film that was shown, the truckers. I mean, it's not a small thing to just shut a mill down like this.
Not at all.
No, the thing is, I mean, to be fair to the politicians back in the 60s, I don't really blame them. They didn't really understand what they were dealing with. That part of Nova Scotia flourished during World War II. It was for shipbuilding, there was coal mining, there were also industries, and it was a complete economic collapse. So they were looking for something to revive. And so Scott came knocking. Scott Paper from Philadelphia already owned a small pulp mill in Nova Scotia, and they owned almost 1 million acres of land. So the government bent over backwards. To quote somebody, they're probably still laughing in Philadelphia at us, because the government built them a causeway to get them to link up Pictou with the point where the pulp mill was built. They tricked the First Nation by lying to them into getting hold of Boat Harbor for the effluent. And then in turn, the province of Nova Scotia agreed to own and treat the effluent from that pulp mill. And we also built for them a causeway which dammed up an entire river to provide them with over 100 million gallons of water every day. And they've paid almost nothing for their water over the years. And we are still responsible now for the cleanup of Boat Harbor and for all of the treatment costs. And we signed these egregious agreements with them over the years, which you can hardly believe now, saying that, you know, the people of Nova Scotia would always indemnify anybody who had anything to do with the mill. And we would be responsible for even getting them environmental permits, which is why, of course, they're going to sue the socks off us now. And the thing is, Boat Harbor became possibly Canada's worst example of environmental racism. So the Premier of Nova Scotia had to make, he's a very stubborn person, he's just resigned, he's stepping back. One of the most difficult decisions that I think any Premier I've seen make, and he made it because he had pledged to the First Nation that he would do so. He would pay attention to the quality of their water, the quality of their life, their health, in addition to the health of the Northumberland Strait, which is ultimately the receptacle for this pulp effluent, the treated effluent, which is also a very important fishing area in Nova Scotia. So he faced a lot of opposition from the forest industry, but the forest industry in Nova Scotia, when Scott came in here, completely changed. that mill basically took over forestry policy in Nova Scotia. Up until then, we had not had clear cutting. We did not have pulp plantations and planting and herbicide spraying, and that's what Scott brought to Nova Scotia. All the small independent mills went out of business. And then they started offloading onto the other mills the responsibility and onto the contractors in the forestry, all of the costs, while the mill soaked up all of the profits. And that was a process over 50 years. So in 2020, we had almost a feudal system where, of course, the forestry industry wanted the mill to stay alive, but that's because they needed it to stay alive. They were totally dependent on it. There was no diversification in our forestry industry, and our forests have really suffered as a result. We have less than 1% now of our forests as old growth in this province. So even though the forestry industry complained a lot, actually in the long run, it's possibly the best thing that could happen for diversification of the forests. And instead of just pulping all of our wood and chipping it and destroying our indigenous Acadian mixed forest for these pulpwood plantations so that we can ship off the raw pulp to Asia, it could be that we could actually turn this around and turn it into a sustainable, mixed and diversified forestry industry in Nova Scotia. So in the long term, the decision was the right one, but it was a tough one to make.
Yeah, and you can see that in the film, these personal stories, like the one woman who suddenly became aware of it when it was in her backyard. And, you know, to some extent, we all have this NIMBY, or not in my backyard approach, where it's not hurting me, but it is when that pipe gets moved. And so the proposal, I understand, David, is that with this agreement to return, obviously probably not to return it to its natural state, but to return Boat Harbor and to stop that pipe, they're going to put in another pipe and pollute another bay.
Yeah, the proposal was to build a 14-kilometer pipe from the mill across the causeway over the Pictou Harbor, down the Trans-Canada Highway to the ferry terminal, which is the main ferry from Nova Scotia to Prince Edward Island, which is a significant tourist location. And also it's at the site of Caribou Harbor, which is the largest fishing flotilla in this part of the shore. So the proposal was to put this pipe in an extraordinarily sensitive part of the coastline, and it immediately evoked a huge response from the local fishermen. And the other piece to that would be that the fishery is primarily lobster. It's very lucrative. The lobster industry actually over the last few years has become increasingly valuable. And also for the last 20 some years, it has been open to the First Nations. Up to just as I say, over the past couple of decades, the First Nations really had restricted access to the fishery. And through a series of circumstances and advocacy, the Pictou Landing First Nation, in fact, became a big player in that lobster industry, and it really created a lot of friction between the Indigenous and non-Indigenous fishermen and fishers. But at the point where the mill set up that proposal to put a pipeline into their fishery, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous fishers really settled all their differences, came together on a common front, and insisted on that this would not happen. So the film is actually boils down to a very succinct conflict, which is pipe, no pipe, you know, and if there's no pipe, there's no mill. And that became the crux of the matter within that particular part of the story. But it was a very big deal for the indigenous and non-indigenous fishermen to form a coalition and resist this idea of putting a pipe into directly right into their fishery. And I'll just want to add a little bit. This part of the coastline is a very rich estuarial system. It's the body of water between Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island. It's a rather shallow body of water. It's quite warm. It's say the warmest water north of the Carolinas. It's a big part of the Atlantic fishery. It's a big recreation area. And it's also highly sensitive in terms of the number of streams, rivers, and other bodies of water that are all along the coast. So I think there was also a growing awareness that, you know, this type of industrial activity was really going to threaten that body of water. And so that the resistance of the fisher community and that with the environmental community and that with the local community, and it just had ripple effect all across the province and indeed across the country, that, you know, this was not going to, you know, be acceptable. And I think the mill knew that. I think that there was a ploy, because for them, their easiest solution was to maintain the use of Boat Harbor. And I think that's what they really wanted. So they came up with a proposal that would really aggravate just about everybody, every constituency possible, with that proposal to put a pipe down to the Caribou Harbor.
Well, it certainly is manifested in the film with some very stirring scenes of angry fishermen blockading the harbor, people with signs, you know, out on the roads, just like real hard old school activism, like, you know.
Yeah.
And obviously, I think it's one of the things that's so interesting, and you mentioned it, that it brings people together that might have other conflicts, and suddenly there's this unity. You know, it actually, we had a film in the International Ocean Film Festival a few years ago. It's called Cod Wars. So it was about the cod fishery, which both our countries overfished off of Newfoundland and the Grand Banks, and the Canadian premier at the time shutting it down. And there were so many angry fishermen, like literally busting the doors down in the parliament, and because their livelihoods were so directly affected. But that fishery is now coming back, happy to say. But one of the interesting things that you mentioned earlier, maybe it was Joan, about how a lot of these products go to China. And maybe your fishery is better, your lobster fishery, because ours, US has imposed these tariffs, and we have all this saber rattling and tension with China. And so a lot of these fishermen on the East Coast in Maine, just south of you, and the Eastern Seaboard are not selling their lobsters abroad. They can't export them. So they're really suffering, not only because of that, but also because of COVID. So it's not just a local issue. You know, it seems local. The people are all living there, smelling the bad smells or seeing the bad water, but it really is an international issue with trade and governments managing fairly large amounts of money and product. So one of the things I wanted to talk about a little bit, because it looked like in some of the book and the readings, there were some case studies or personal stories about people who become ill. Is that right, Joan? You talked a little bit more about the health effects and the cancer.
Yeah.
Is that?
Oh, absolutely. That was one of the major things, is the province steadfastly refused to do any epidemiological studies on the really, really high rates of cancer and the really, really high rates of respiratory illnesses in Pictou County and even beyond. I mean, the people in Charlottetown, which is the capital of Prince Edward Island across the Northumberland Strait, 25 kilometers, also suffer from asthma caused by the mill. And the other problem is because it was really such a case of corporate capture, where the government was in so deep that it just kept going in deeper and deeper. And, you know, former premiers then went and joined the boards after they gave them a lot of money. that the province didn't do the kind of environmental monitoring it should have been doing when there were fish kills caused, at the mouth of Boat Harbor, or from the emissions from the stacks of that pulp mill, which really looked like Mordor. I don't know if you've seen the cover of my book, but that was a fairly typical day. And, this could be a tourist mecca. Pictou is stunningly beautiful, but you couldn't go there. And they were exceeding all of their parameters for air pollution. But the most they were ever fined, to my knowledge, in 50 years was $657, which is what you get for jaywalking in the capital city. So people were suffering with these horrendous respiratory diseases. There's very high incidence of brain cancer, which they think is caused by the particulate matter, which comes out of those stacks, which sometimes would it be 74 times as higher than it was supposed to be. And they just kept pumping out the pulp, and the government didn't do anything because they felt so bound by all these agreements that they had made with the mill. So it really was, to me, a microcosm of a problem we see all around the world, which is really where governments get captured because of always this promise of jobs and the tax revenue, which they rarely get, because these corporations set up all these wonderful shell companies and have managed to shift money between themselves, so they never actually have to pay very much tax. So it was really a microcosm of everything that could go wrong, really. Air pollution, water pollution, environmental racism, abuse of human rights, and corporate capture, a loss of democracy, because it didn't just pollute the air, it polluted our politics for half a century. And I think that's a very common problem the world over, actually.
Interesting analogy, polluting the politics. If you're just tuning in to the International Ocean Film Festival conversation, I'm David McGuire with the festival, and we have Joan Baxter, author of The Mill, and David Craig, director of the film The Mill, that was supposed to be in our festival, but COVID made it internationally digitized. And so we're having this conversation that's really compelling. And if you are listening in and want to ask a question, please, you can go to the chat or send it in, and we'll try to ask those questions. So Joan, it became a constitutional issue too, as I understand, a free speech issue, because when you wrote the book, I believe it was 2017, and you brought it to a bookstore to do a reading, there was pressure from the mill, maybe it was a legal pressure to ban the reading, to make it illegal, or to stop the bookstore reading and exposing this issue. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I'll just step back a little bit. And one of the things that I realized when I was researching the book, and that's why it wound up being called 50 Years of Pulp and Protest. It was going to be a terrible title, 50 Years of Pulp Nonfiction, which is just so terrible. It's embarrassing. But it was because people have been protesting that mill since day one. And so there was a lot of activity against the mill, and the mill fought back like a bully. Frankly, it had a bully culture. So when I wrote the book, I was supposed to be doing a book signing over in a bookstore in New Glasgow, which is a few kilometers away from Pictou. And I was called by the bookstore and asked not to come because they had been getting threats. And what happened was that the mill itself had orchestrated a letter writing campaign with all of its employees and former employees, and they were sending the letters off to the head office of it's a national book chain called Chapters Indigo, and to the local bookstore, and saying that if they allowed my book signing to go ahead, they would boycott, and they would orchestrate a boycott of the bookstore across the country. And other people had threatened that they would come in and tear up the book and cause a big ruckus and maybe attack me. So as a result, I didn't do the book signing, but I was asked not to say anything about it. So very obediently, I didn't. But what happened is that people actually went there because it had been advertised and were told that it had been canceled, and it went around on social media. And then that's when the uproar started. And it backfired on them, let me put it that way, because it actually made the book, which probably would have slept its way into oblivion, into a bestseller for 3 months because I got national media coverage about the fact that I had been shut down for this book signing. So, but it has actually, it shocked me because I had worked for many years as a journalist in young democracies and non-democracies in Africa. And I said, I didn't expect this in Canada. This never happened to me in Africa. And now it's happening to me back here in Canada, that literally I've had my free expression rights impinged upon, and I never got an apology. And as a result, people started to attach the epithet controversial whenever they talked about my book, which did it a lot of harm in the long run, in my opinion. So it backfired from the short term, but in the long run, it probably served their interests. But yeah, that's what happened.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And at least in the short term, it was great that it did backfire and good for your book sales. So your publisher was probably happy at the time. Yeah, I mean, because controversial really, yeah, I mean, that talk show host, love that term, right? And the talking heads, well, you know, you have one person in opposition, it becomes a controversy or a debate. We do have a question for David, actually, about the making of the film. And I imagine the inspiration was the book. You both live nearby, right? In the area of Pictou, and
Yep.
you know. So I guess what was the inspiration? Was it the book? Was it you were smelling the issue, or you were there? I mean, smelling the nasty fumes, or what really galvanized you? Because it's no small undertaking to make a film like this.
Well, there was a number of different things that happened. The blockade of 2014, the publication of Joan's book in 2017, and it also coincided. Joan's book, I think, came out in November, or late October, November. And around the same time, early December, the mill announced the plan for the pipe. I happened to be in Pictou at the time. I was dividing my time at that time between Toronto and Pictou. And so definitely there was the cancellation of the book launch in New Glasgow. That made national media. And prior to that, 2015, there was a huge demonstration that was organized by Dave Gunning that attracted thousands of people, the Clean the Air movement, and the blockade. There was just the realization that this was a historic moment, not just a historic moment for Pictou County, but a historic moment for the province of Nova Scotia, because it really, the forces that came together and collided in December of 2017 was really unprecedented. It really activated people in a way I had never seen people activated here before. The local community, Pictou County, didn't have a lot of agency about the creation of the mill and the installation of the mill. And they had really suffered a great deal in silence for a long time, notwithstanding the successive waves of protests that came. And the government just stonewalled, silenced, resisted any movement that would change the status quo. And, you know, when the fishermen, the indigenous, non-indigenous fishermen came together, when the community came together with the Clear the Air movement, Joan's book came out, you just had an unmistakable sense that there was a turning point taking place. And for me, it was just, I have never felt so committed to tell a story as at that moment. It's so close to home. It was so momentous. It had so many dimensions, and it was so historic that I just felt compelled to capture this moment.
Well, it's definitely very powerful. You can see the emotional involvement and engagement, even you speaking about it.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, it's such a beautiful part of the world, just so gorgeous, and you know, that great ocean. And And also, I imagine salmon fishery is pretty important in that region as well.
Well, no, there's not really a salmon fishery. There's a world famous salmon recreational salmon fishery.
Okay.
Again, this is an estuarial system that goes from New Brunswick down the coast of Nova Scotia. It's a sort of a unique environment, and it has many rivers. But a lot of the salmon, the wild salmon, has been affected by industrial development, civilization. There's certainly like world-class fishery in the Miramichi, and that's where ex-presidents like George Bush and the people like Sylvester Stallone like to go if they want to go salmon fishing. But it's not an industry per se. It's certainly a big tourist draw, and creates a lot of money for guides and fishing. But the salmon industry that takes place in Nova Scotia now is farm salmon, and that's a whole other ecological story. That's actually gaining momentum at the moment because, again, the province has licensed salmon fishing, not on this shore so much, but on the South Shore. And people are up in arms about that because it's totally affecting not only the wild salmon, but also the other fisheries. Threatens the lobster industry. It's polluting the waters. That's a whole other issue.
Yeah, it is a whole other issue, and it was an issue that we actually talked about last week with Josh Murphy, the filmmaker of Artificial. So we had him on here on one of these in the International Ocean Film Festival, and how it affects Native Americans and water rights, and very analogous in some ways. But here in the Klamath River in Northern California, we don't have very much fish farming here. Most of it would be mostly it's wild fish, but as you said, there environmental degradation. It comes around clean water again and healthy
Yes.
habitat, right? It all goes downhill and it all connects to the ocean.
Absolutely. The common element here is protecting the waters. That's really reverberated here, and it's where the First Nations and Pictou Landing have taken a real leadership role. They've insisted that we have to, especially at this point in time, protect the waters.
Well, you have another question, and I'm sorry I'm not familiar with your body of work. Had you produced other documentaries? And the question really was, what was the most challenging part of making this film?
Yeah, we have myself and my partner have a sort of a boutique documentary film company. This type of subject matter is actually very different than what we're usually engaged in. We've made 6 other films that are portraits of artists, and so it really has. This would be, I guess, the first time we've taken on an issue like this. But again, as I say, we were close to it. So we have a fishing dock at the foot of our, where we live. We know some fishermen. We know lots of people in the community, and we just felt like this is, as I said, a historical moment, and that we had the access to the story and the tools to make that story, that it was really compelling. But so it was a bit of a different type of project for us. The most challenging thing about making the film was trying to find the balance, because it would be so easy to take one side in a very, very complicated issue. And this was, we're talking about people's livelihood on both sides, and we're talking about rural communities where, very much it's a resource-based economy. So fishing is one, and a lot of fishermen work in the woods, and a lot of people who are forestries do, have so friends and relatives and family members were interconnected here in a very complicated way that it was, you know, not easy just to say, be dismissive. There's, you know, centuries of history of forest working in this country and in this province. You know, the fishery is actually, in a way, a newcomer because it's only been in a major part of the economy for about 150 years, whereas forestry has been here since the very beginning of, I mean, that's the first job of colonists, is to cut down the forests. So, and also it took a long time to have any access to the mill. Whereas, you know, the fishermen, which are a very clannish bunch, were very open, and they invited us to their annual meeting. That was, to my mind, really unprecedented. That really got the whole project going. And of course, it was really important to have representation from Pictou Landing First Nation. And if it wasn't for the generosity of Chief Paul and her openness, we wouldn't have that story. But it took a long time I didn't have as many contacts in the forest sector, and certainly nothing from the mill. And it took a long time knocking on their door before they relented somewhat but we were very grateful that we were able to get an interview with some of their representatives. So that was the real challenge, and it was a challenge throughout the whole film to try to get the multiple dimensions of the story.
I'm wondering if you had any backlash or repercussions like Joan had with the book and her readings.
No, nothing overt, nothing personal, nothing directed towards, to my knowledge, towards me personally, or I mean, I think there was certainly grumbling, and there was certainly a lot of dismissiveness. You know, people dismissed the film, or, you know, but nothing serious in the way of a blowback from making it.
Have you screened the film in the community?
Well, no, not directly. I mean, it was broadcast on television, so I think that everybody had their opportunity to screen it, and I see it on TV, and I think a lot of people did it that way, and you know, it made it a little less controversial to have people watch their living rooms rather than gather in a sort of a town hall type of situation to do it.
Yeah, well, hopefully with COVID, that keeps people.
So people had access to it. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
So was that with support from Canadian Broadcasting System, or?
Yep. Yeah.
Right.
It was commissioned by we pitched them. They accepted it, and they financed it.
Yeah, I think that's a really wonderful thing that Canada has, Australia has, France has, the US does not have, is support for independent filmmakers with large government or decent sized government grants to produce it and distribute. Like, I mean, to have it on television reaches a broad audience.
Yeah, that was certainly, you know, that was the goal, and I was really happy that they found it a worthwhile story.
Well, thank you. So, Joan, somebody was asking about the book and the process, because you have a background in journalism and reporting, and clearly it shows. And as I said, I haven't read the book, but I've read about the book, and I've looked at some of the reviews, and you definitely did some serious investigative reporting. Are you working on something similar, or what's going on in your future here?
I'm a bit like David. There's so many issues coming at me every day that I'm struggling to get actually, I was kind of struggling. I thought Northern Pulp, the mill, would be finished, but it continues in the courts. So that's a lot of work, reading 600 and 700 page documents. And that just, last year I was reading all their environmental assessment documents. Those are also thousands of pages. We have a lot more going on here. There's especially with the soaring price of gold. Nova Scotia was a gold producer back in the 1800s. And so the gold diggers are back. And that's a real threat to, you talked about salmon in our rivers. I mean, we have one river, the St. Mary's River, where Babe Ruth used to come and fish salmon. It was a really popular place. And the salmon population the Atlantic wild salmon were really hurt by acid rain, believe it or not. And they're not making a comeback in most parts of the province, but the St. Mary's River, they are making a comeback. And lo and behold, there's a company that wants to have an open pit gold mine right beside that river. So there's enough to write about. There's lots to write about. The aquaculture is an ongoing issue in the province. We never know when the frackers are going to come knocking again. So we've got issue after issue after issue to write about. And the First Nations population in Eastern Canada has really, really been leading the charge in the water protection domain, as David said. So these days I feel like I'm kind of following them, because they're definitely the leaders on trying to protect the various water sources. And so, yeah, I'm busy. I haven't got any books going, but I'm definitely working in journalism still.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of a film we had in our festival, and I believe it's still going on, and it's in British Columbia, but it's about salmon and a gold mine. And I'd heard that, it got, because of the protests, that they decided not to do it, but now there's discussion again in opening that up, and probably because it follows the trends in the global market for the precious metals. Wow, I mean, there's always a lot of stories out there, and a lot of need for people telling that story and motivating people to protect what's left, right? I mean, I work in shark conservation and fishing policy, and without those people behind us, without the fishermen, the people who are actually know it the best, the first people, who understand it more than any of us as biologists or activists or journalists, we need them to help us tell their story, and then we need to get their story out, I guess. Well, great. Well, I think the same question to you, David. I mean, the film's relatively new. It's still in the film festival circuit as well, is it not?
Yeah. It's going to several different communities in Canada, Thunder Bay, and it's also in one of the Indigenous film festivals that's coming up in the fall. And it's still, you can still stream it on CBC. So, it's out there circulating, yes.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. Besides our International Ocean Film Festival, can people see it? So CBC is actually still streaming The Mill.
It's streaming in Canada, and we have, the United States is a bit of a different territory, so we haven't have a streaming host in the US yet, but we're working on it.
Good. Well, that means people need to tune into the International Ocean Film Festival and donate.
That's right.
We're a nonprofit to
That's
support
right.
independent films as well as independent filmmakers. So
that's right.
We hope to encourage people to sign up. This is our second week this year and our first virtual film festival in 17 years. And it's been a challenge, but I have to give my hats off to Ana Blanco, our executive director, as well as the board, who early on decided we're going to do it online. And so we were able to prepare and actually host what I think is a really well-run virtual film festival. We're getting a lot of attendance, and these discussions are also really stimulating. So thank you, David Craig and Joan Baxter, for your participation. Are you working on another film, David? Or are you still kind of deeply immersed in this film?
Well, actually, my partner is working on a film. We're just completing photography on that. It's a portrait of an artist. And it's also deals with certain health issues. So we hope to finish that by the end of the year. And I have great colleagues here in the Atlantic region. So I hope to continue working with my co-producer Anne Bernier, who was my co-producer here for The Mill, and and certainly as Joan pointed out, there's a lot going on in terms of issues, and And certainly, I mean, we're so grateful to be part of the International Oceans Festival because it's such an important part, it's such an important piece now of the whole ecological movement. The ocean is in jeopardy, and it affects everyone. So we're very, grateful to have the film in this festival, and I think the festival is very important in terms of bringing the message home that how important the ocean is.
Well, thank you. And I, I'd said early on that we have a great relationship with the Canadian Consulate, including financial support for the Ocean Film Festival. But we also got the consulate down. I'm an ocean swimmer. We swim in the San Francisco Bay, and we actually got him down and had him swim in the San Francisco Bay with us. So there's commitment. Not quite as cold as the water.
Well, there's the big story here in Atlantic Canada right now is the great white sharks that are being tracked up and down the Atlantic seaboard, and people are becoming very fascinated with their movement right now.
Yeah, and I follow that because I'm also a marine biologist and involved in the white shark study off our coastline, just 30 miles off where it's our National Marine Sanctuary, and our population has been recovering pretty nicely over the past couple of decades, but now you're really starting to see it in the eastern seaboard. And with that technology, people realize, hey, there's a shark close by when there probably was anyway.
Yeah.
Now you know about it more. And the first death in 85 years, and so it's a, kind of a reality that we have to live with as well as hopefully coexist. But I mean, it also ties in with a good environmental story. Protecting our marine mammals, and we've had several films in the Ocean Film Festival about whaling, about the recovery of marine mammals. Here in the U.S., the Marine Mammal Protection Act in 1972 really has caused a huge increase in the populations of seals and sea lions, which are the white shark's favorite food. So that's what's going on. Those sharks are just coming in, following their food, and sometimes we get in the way.
For the fishermen here, there couldn't be enough sharks because the seal population is considered the villain in terms of the comeback of the cod fishery.
And here too, and sometimes unfortunately you find a sea lion dead ashore with a bullet shot. But I've seen it actually tagging sharks, not white sharks, but smaller sharks, and big male elephant seals will hang out, and then you let it go and they'll bite. It's like, after all that effort and the tag too. So that's part of wildlife and dealing with nature. Well, we only have a few minutes left, and I just wanted to, get close to wrapping it up and thank you again. Is there anything that you'd like to add, David, and Joan, next? But maybe is there a call to action? Is there an online petition? Can people write? As Canadians, what can Canadians do to try to, actually support this community, I guess?
Well, it's a very interesting point, suggestion. I think that for me, what was really important here was how the local community gained agency over their own environment. And I think that if there's a message to a general message, it is, this is happening in everyone's backyard. And if one watches the film, I think it's really important for me that the people who speak are people who are directly, affected by this. Chief Paul of the Pictou Landing First Nation, the fishermen, even the woodworkers. These are people who are being affected and engaged in resisting the corporatism that has heretofore controlled their local environment. And I think it's really important to that the big message that's happening here in the rural areas is that rural communities have to take greater control over their destiny. They have to take greater control over their community and their resources, and not be controlled by government, like larger governments that are selling resources to foreign interests.
Thank you for that. And Joan, would you like to add something to that?
I think what came out of this for me that's so incredibly positive, especially at a time like this on the planet where people seem to be more and more polarized and divided is how much we're all actually all connected. I mean, even listening to you talking about the West Coast, I mean, we're in the East Coast, exactly the same things are happening, whether it's in British Columbia, in California, in Nova Scotia, in Maine. And of course, the ocean is binding us all together. And I feel like there could be like literally a groundswell of concern for really the health of the ocean, the health of our water, that I saw on a local level, but which I see now because of communication on an international level. That's why I'm so pleased that you're doing this in California. You've got your International Oceans Film Festival, which is looking at similar issues that are affecting people everywhere on the planet. And that's, to me, was something that really positive that came out of the experience of this.
Well, thank you for that. And I do want to give a shout that you can find your book on Amazon, of course. What can't you find on Amazon is the question. But I encourage people to read The Mill, see the film. And thank you for that closing thought, because it really is the ocean that connects us all globally. We all rely on the ocean for our breath, our food, our recreation, our climate. And without clean water and clean oceans and healthy wildlife within it, we won't have a healthy humanity. We're going to be connecting across the ocean with one of our filmmakers, with Anna the Thresher Shark, on Thursday. I'll be hosting a program here on International Ocean Film Festival at 5 with the filmmaker, who's also an activist that we work with in Southeast Asia, where Shark Stewards works 3 to 4 months out of the year, when COVAS lets us take a plane there, trying to protect sharks and limit the shark fin trade. And I wanted to give a shout out to Canada. It was as the first nation in the world to ban the sale and trade of shark fin on a large level. We worked in California introducing a law. We have 13 state laws. We've got a bill in 3 Congresses. And is it going to get through the Senate this year? Doubt it. So good for you, Canada, for looking out for our sharks, as well as the fish and the rivers and the trees. And we also have a compliment to you and the festival for one of our supporters, Rachel Finnemore. And she says, cheers to IOFF and the filmmakers. Thank you so much for panelists for your integral work in telling this grave story and in helping to get knowledge of the issue out there. Really incredible research and journalism, Joan. Thank you, Joan. Thank you, David. Thank you for a really great film, a really great conversation. Keep up the good work. We'll be watching for the progress and hoping that the native peoples will get their clean waters, that the fish will recover, the economy will resume, and the forest will go back into a more natural state. So thank you, and thank you to the audience for joining the International Ocean Film Festival.
Thank you.
Thank you.